There are places in Scandinavia where the world you know ends, not with fanfare or declaration, but with a shift in the air, a change in the quality of light filtering through ancient branches. The forests here are old, older than the churches that dot the valleys, older than the kingdoms that rose and fell across these northern lands. They remember a time before iron plows broke the earth, before Christian bells rang across frozen fjords, before human voices claimed dominion over every shadow and stone. Stand at the forest edge on a summer evening in Norway or Sweden, where cultivated fields give way to wilderness. The boundary is sharp, almost violent in its clarity. On one side, order, cultivation, the geometry of human intention. On the other, depths that swallow sound and light, where pine and birch grow so dense that at midday, the forest floor remains in perpetual twilight. This is not the tamed woodland of fairy tales, sanitized and safe. This is the untouched wild, and it has always belonged to something else. For centuries, those who lived in the scattered farmsteads and isolated villages knew better than to treat the forest as empty space waiting to be claimed. The woodsmen who ventured in for timber, the charcoal burners who spent weeks alone tending their smoking mounds, the hunters tracking elk and bear through trackless snow, they all understood a fundamental truth. The forest was inhabited, ruled over by forces that predated human memory and cared nothing for human laws. You could enter, but only on sufferance, and you had to respect the protocols of a realm that was not and would never be yours. The Scandinavian forest is a place of transformation and revelation. Here, the rational world grows thin and uncertain. Trails that were clear an hour ago vanish as though they never existed. Sounds carry strangely, warped and magnified or deadened completely. Time itself seems to move differently beneath that canopy. Minutes stretching into hours or collapsing into instants. Men have entered these woods at dawn and emerged days later, bewildered and changed, unable to account for the lost time or explain the things they witnessed in those green depths. It is in this liminal space, this threshold between human order and primal wilderness, that she dwells, the Huldra. Her name comes from an old root meaning hidden or covered or secret, and all three translations capture something essential about her nature. She is the concealed truth of the forest, the beautiful surface that hides something other, the secret that can save you or destroy you, depending on how you receive it. She has been known by many names across the Scandinavian lands. In Sweden, they call her Skogsrå, the forest spirit, or sometimes Talemaja, pine tree Mary. In Norway, she is Huldra or Huldren, a being so deeply woven into the cultural fabric that her presence is assumed rather than questioned. The Sami people know her as Ulda. Each name carries its own weight of meaning, its own accumulated centuries of encounters and warnings and desperate bargains made under starless skies. But names, in the end, are only sounds, attempts to contain and define something that resists containment. What matters is what she represents, what she has always represented to those who must live and work in her domain. She is the forest made flesh, its beauty and its danger personified, its ancient claim on the land given form and will and terrible purpose. The stories agree on certain fundamentals. She appears as a woman, young and extraordinarily beautiful. Her hair flows long and unbound, the color of ripened wheat or autumn chestnuts, depending on which tale you hear, which valley spawned the legend. Sometimes she wears the traditional dress of the region, the bunads with their intricate embroidery and silver clasps, looking for all the world like a farmer's daughter who has wandered too far from home. Sometimes she appears naked, her skin pale as birch bark, her body a study in perfection that makes mortal women seem crude and unfinished by comparison. Her voice is said to be mesmerizing, a sound that reaches into the chest and wraps around the heart. She sings as she moves through the forest, old songs in languages that predate the Norse tongue, melodies that seem to come from the earth itself. Men who hear that singing report a sensation of profound longing, a need to find the source, to see the face that produces such beauty. It is a compulsion, not a choice, and those who follow that sound barely return unchanged. She does not hunt indiscriminately. The Huldra has always been selective, particular in her attention. The charcoal burners, spending long weeks alone in forest clearings, tending their slow-burning mounds, they encounter her most frequently. Perhaps it is the isolation that draws her, or the fact that these men have chosen to live temporarily in her realm, accepting its terms. Hunters, too, report sightings, men who track game deep into territories where few others venture, who sleep rough under the stars and wake to find her watching from the tree line. There is a pattern to these encounters, a structure that repeats across hundreds of recorded accounts. She appears at dusk or dawn, in that uncertain light when the eye cannot quite trust what it sees. She is alone, always alone, a solitary figure in a landscape of overwhelming vastness. She approaches without fear, without the hesitation that would mark a normal human woman, finding herself face to face with a strange man in the wilderness. She speaks or sings, or simply looks with eyes that hold depths no human gaze should contain. And here, at this moment of first contact, the man faces a choice he does not yet understand he is making. Does he see only the beauty, the impossible perfection of her face and form? Does he accept the food she offers, the companionship, the promise of something more? Or does his gaze slip, traveling down her body or circling behind, seeking the detail that reveals the truth? Because she is beautiful, yes, achingly so. But she is not human. She never was. And that difference, that fundamental otherness, shows itself to those who look carefully enough or carelessly enough or are simply unlucky enough to see her from the wrong angle at the wrong moment. From behind, the illusion shatters. There, where human anatomy should curve and flow in familiar patterns, something else entirely is revealed. Before we go further into her true nature, before we examine what lies beneath that perfect exterior, consider this. If you found this exploration of Scandinavian folklore fascinating, if you want to journey deeper into the myths that shaped Northern Europe, then subscribe now. We are building a community of those who understand that the old stories are not merely entertainment, but windows into how our ancestors understood the world, its dangers, its sacred spaces, its unbridgeable gaps between human and other. Click that subscribe button and join us as we pull back the veil on the creatures that still haunt the dark places of the collective imagination. The forest waits. It has always waited. And at its heart, patient and ageless and utterly inhuman despite her human face, the Huldra watches for the next wanderer, the next man who will stumble into her realm and face the choice that has been offered and refused and accepted for 1,000 years, the choice that determines whether he leaves the forest unchanged or never leaves at all. She appears without warning, though perhaps warning is the wrong word. Perhaps it would be more accurate to say she appears when she chooses, when the conditions align in ways that serve her purposes or satisfy her curiosity or answer some need that human minds cannot comprehend. One moment the forest clearing is empty, silent except for the whisper of wind through pine needles, and the next moment she is there, as though she had always been there, as though the forest itself has taken form and walked into your field of vision. From the front, she is perfect, not merely beautiful in the way a human woman might be beautiful, with pleasing features and good proportions, but perfect in a way that makes the word beauty seem inadequate and small. Her face holds a symmetry that human faces, shaped by the lottery of genetics and the accidents of development, can never quite achieve. Her eyes are luminous, their colors shifting with the light. Now green as summer leaves, now gray as winter sky, now holding depths of brown like fertile earth. Those eyes look at you with an intensity that feels like recognition, as though she knows you, has always known you, has been waiting specifically for this moment when your paths would cross. Her hair is her crown, and her veil, cascading down past her shoulders in waves that catch and hold the forest light. In some accounts, it flows blonde as wheat, ready for harvest. Golden strands that seem to carry their own illumination, even in the deep shade of the forest. In others, it falls in rich chestnut brown, dark as autumn nuts, as polished wood, as earth after rain. The color varies from tale to tale, from region to region, but the effect is constant. Her hair moves as though alive, stirred by breezes you cannot feel, rippling and shifting in patterns that draw the eye and hold it captive. Sometimes she appears clothed in the traditional dress of the region. The bunad, with its intricate embroidery and carefully wrought silver clasps. The fabric hugs her form, the bodice laced tight, the skirt falling in pleats that sway as she moves. The colors are rich, deep reds and blues and greens, the kind of dyes that speak of wealth and status. The silver ornaments at her breast and waist catch what little light penetrates the canopy, sending small sparks into the dimness. She looks, in these moments, like a farmer's daughter dressed for a festival, like a merchant's wife who has wandered from the village, like someone who belongs to the human world and simply happens to be passing through the forest on legitimate business. But more often, in the accounts that survive in folklore archives and academic collections, she appears naked. Her skin is pale, luminous as birch bark, smooth as water, unmarked by the scars and blemishes that mark human flesh. Her body is a study in idealized proportion, curves and lines that artists have tried to capture for centuries and never quite managed to reproduce. She stands unself-conscious in her nakedness, utterly without shame or modesty, as natural in her bare skin as the deer that watch from the undergrowth or the birds that nest in the branches overhead. Her long hair provides the only covering, falling forward over her shoulders and breasts, a curtain of gold or chestnut that conceals and reveals in equal measure. She sometimes brushes this hair as she appears, drawing a comb of bone or wood through the strands in long, measured strokes. The gesture is intimate, domestic, the kind of thing a woman might do in the privacy of her home. And seeing it performed here in the wild forest creates a strange cognitive dissonance. It makes her seem vulnerable, human, approachable. It is, of course, a lie, or at least a profound misdirection. Her voice, when she speaks or sings, completes the seduction that her appearance began. The quality of it defies easy description, though men who have heard it and survived to tell the tale have tried. Some say it sounds like wind through leaves, a susurrus that bypasses the ear and resonates directly in the chest. Others describe it as clear and pure as mountain water, crystalline notes that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Still others claim it carries the richness of earth itself, deep and resonant, ancient beyond measure. She sings in languages that predate the Norse tongue, words that have no modern equivalents, syllables that shape meanings lost when the old gods retreated and the church bells began to ring. The melodies twist and turn in patterns that feel both familiar and alien, as though they tap into something fundamental in human consciousness. Some shared ancestral memory of music before music was codified and tamed. Men who hear her singing report an overwhelming compulsion to find the source, to see the face that produces such beauty, to stand in the presence of whatever being can command sound in this way. The effect is not subtle. It is not a gentle attraction or mild curiosity. It is a need that obliterates reason, that shuts down the parts of the brain responsible for caution and self-preservation. Your feet move without conscious command. Your body turns toward the sound. Every fiber of your being orients itself toward her, toward the promise implicit in that voice, that face, that impossible perfection standing before you in the green twilight. She does not rush. She does not need to. She knows the effect she produces, has known it for centuries, for millennia perhaps. She stands and regards you with those shifting eyes, and you feel seen in a way that is both thrilling and terrifying. Not seen as a category or a type, but seen as an individual, noticed, assessed, found worthy of attention. In a life defined by anonymity and toil, by the grinding sameness of survival in these harsh northern lands, being seen this way feels like a gift, like validation, like the answer to prayers you did not know you were praying. She may speak to you, her voice now directed in conversation rather than song. She asks questions that seem innocuous. Where are you from? What brings you so deep into the forest? Are you tired? Are you hungry? Her concern appears genuine, her interest in your well-being warm and immediate. She may offer food, pulling from nowhere bread that steams as though fresh from the oven, cheese that tastes richer than anything produced by mortal hands, mead that burns sweetly down your throat and fills your head with golden fog. Or she may simply stand there, allowing you to look, to take in the reality of her presence. Her smile, when it comes, transforms her face from merely perfect to transcendent. It is a smile that promises understanding, acceptance, pleasure beyond imagining. It is the smile of someone who knows secrets and might, if you prove worthy, share them. It is designed, whether consciously or through countless iterations of evolutionary adaptation, to bypass every defense, to slip past every wall, to make you forget every warning your grandmother whispered about the forest and its inhabitants. This is the face of seduction, then. Not crude or obvious, not the painted allure of the brothel or the calculated charm of the con artist, but something far more primal and irresistible. It is beauty weaponized, perfection deployed with purpose. It is the forest's answer to the question of how to lure human prey into range, how to overcome the natural wariness that keeps men alive in dangerous places. It is the trap that looks like salvation, the danger that wears the mask of desire fulfilled. And you, standing there in the clearing with your heart hammering and your breath short and your mind clouded by need, you do not yet understand that you are being hunted. You see only what she allows you to see, the front-facing perfection, the promise of something extraordinary breaking into your ordinary life. You do not think to look behind her, to check the details, to question why such a woman would be here, alone, waiting. You see what you want to see. And that is exactly the problem, exactly the design, exactly how she has always operated in these woods where men venture thinking themselves masters and discover too late that they are nothing but prey. The moment stretches. She waits. The forest waits. Everything hinges on what happens next, on whether you accept what is offered or whether some instinct, some fragment of ancestral wisdom, makes you pause and look more carefully at this gift the forest has placed before you. The moment of revelation does not announce itself with thunder or warning bells. It comes quietly, almost accidentally, in the space between heartbeats, when your attention shifts or your position changes or simple chance rotates your perspective by a few critical degrees. You have been standing there, transfixed by her beauty, lost in the depths of those shifting eyes and the promise of that perfect smile. And then some stray impulse or fragment of surviving caution, makes you move. Perhaps you step to the side to get a better view of her face in the failing light. Perhaps you circle slightly, unconsciously positioning yourself at a more advantageous angle. Perhaps she herself turns, reaching for something or gesturing toward a path through the trees, and in that turning presents you with a view you were never meant to see. However it happens, whenever it happens, the result is the same. The illusion shatters like glass struck by a stone, and you see what lies beneath the beautiful surface, the truth that her frontal perfection was designed to conceal. From behind, she's something else entirely. The cascade of golden or chestnut hair still flows down her back, still moves with that uncanny life of its own, but now it frames rather than conceals. Below the fall of her hair, emerging from beneath the hem of her traditional dress or visible in the gap where her bare skin should curve smoothly into her legs, you see it, a tail, long and tufted, covered in coarse hair, swishing slowly back and forth with bovine indifference to your presence. It is a cow's tail, unmistakably so, and it grows from her body as naturally as if she were indeed the creature it suggests. In Norway, this is the mark most commonly reported, the detail that appears again and again in accounts recorded by folklorists and preserved in regional archives. The tail of a cow, complete with the characteristic tuft at its end, attached to a body that is otherwise human in form and proportion. The cognitive dissonance is immediate and devastating. Your brain, which had accepted the woman standing before you as human despite the impossibility of her perfection, now struggles to reconcile this new information. Human faces do not sit atop bodies that terminate in bovine appendages. The categories are mutually exclusive. Yet here it is, undeniable, swaying gently in the forest air. In some accounts, particularly those from Sweden, the tail is different. Not the thick, rope-like appendage of a cow, but the bushy, luxuriant tail of a fox. It emerges from the same impossible location, a eruption of russet fur that streams behind her like a banner. The foxtail carries its own associations, its own weight of meaning. The fox is cunning, predatory, a trickster in animal form. To bear its tail is to announce yourself as deceiver, as one who operates through guile rather than force. Either way, cow or fox, the tail serves the same function. It is the mark of otherness, the sign that proclaims her fundamental alienness from humanity. But the tail, shocking as it is not always the worst revelation. In many accounts, especially those from western and northern Sweden and from Norway, there is something else, something that transforms shock into visceral horror. Her back, exposed now to your gaze, as she turns or bends or simply stands unaware of your repositioning, is not flesh. It is hollow, carved out like the interior of a dead tree, a cavity where living tissue should be. The edges of this hollowness show bark, rough and gray, growing directly from or perhaps replacing her skin. She is a woman from the front and a rotting tree trunk from behind. A grotesque fusion that violates every expectation about how bodies work, what life looks like, where the boundary between plant and animal lies. The hollow back serves multiple purposes in the folklore. Practically, it allows her to press herself against trees and become nearly invisible, her excavated spine fitting flush against the trunk, her profile reduced to nothing when viewed from the wrong angle. She can stand in plain sight and remain unseen, just another weathered piece of the forest landscape, just another dead tree waiting to fall. But symbolically, the hollow back carries far darker implications. It suggests that what appears whole is actually empty, that beneath the surface perfection lies in absence, a void where humanity or soul or warmth should reside. She is beautiful on the outside precisely because there is nothing on the inside. A shell animated by purposes that have nothing to do with the human values of love or companionship or genuine connection. The moment you see the truth, whether it is tail or hollow back or both, your relationship to her changes irrevocably. The spell does not break gradually or gently. It shatters. Where a moment before you saw the answer to unspoken longings, you now see a predator, a thing that wears human beauty the way a hunter wears camouflage, as a tool of deception in service of an agenda you do not yet understand. Your body responds before your conscious mind catches up. Your stomach lurches. Your skin goes cold despite the relatively mild forest air. Some deep, ancient part of your nervous system recognizes that you are in the presence of something profoundly wrong, something that violates the basic rules of the natural world. What you do next, in the seconds immediately following this revelation, will determine whether you walk out of these woods, or whether the forest claims you as it has claimed so many others. The folklore is clear on this point, repeated across hundreds of accounts from multiple regions spanning centuries. Your reaction to seeing her true nature is the hinge upon which your fate swings. There are right responses and wrong responses, and the margin for error is non-existent. If you scream, you die. If you recoil in visible disgust, you die. If you shout an accusation, point at the tail or the hollow back, make any sound or gesture that expresses revulsion or horror or rejection, you have sealed your fate. She turns fully to face you now, and the beautiful features you were admiring moments before transform into something else. The smile becomes a rictus of rage. The luminous eyes fill with an ancient, inhuman fury. She is no longer attempting seduction. She is defending herself, or perhaps punishing you for daring to look where you should not have looked, for seeing what was meant to remain hidden. What happens next varies by account, but the outcome is always the same. You do not leave the forest. Your body, if it is ever found, shows signs of violence that no animal could have inflicted and no human could have survived. The accounts preserved in Norwegian folklore archives describe men found days or weeks after their disappearance, their bodies broken in ways that suggest immense strength applied with calculated cruelty, limbs twisted backward at impossible angles, ribs crushed inward, skulls bearing the imprint of something that was not quite a hand, but not quite a hoof either. These are not deaths that come quickly or without suffering. They are demonstrations, messages left for those who find them. This is what happens when you see and react poorly. This is the price of visible rejection. But rejection, it turns out, is not the only option. The folklore recognizes that some men, whether through quick thinking or genuine acceptance or simple shock that paralyzes their ability to respond, do not scream or recoil. They stand there, confronted with the impossible, and they choose a different path. They accept. They look at the tail, at the hollow back, at the revelation of her otherness, and they do not express horror. They nod. They smile. They continue the conversation as though nothing has changed. They understand, in that crucial moment, that she is offering them a choice disguised as a test. Will you love the surface only, or will you accept the whole truth? Will you run when faced with something beyond your categories? Or will you adapt, expand, make room in your understanding of the world for this being, who is neither fully human, nor fully beast, nor fully tree, but something that transcends and confuses all three? Acceptance, however, comes with its own complications and costs. The man who sees her secret and does not flee, who looks at her inhuman features and chooses to stay, enters into a relationship that will define and constrain the rest of his life. He becomes hers in a way that has nothing to do with human concepts of marriage or partnership. He will live with her, in the forest or in some impossible dwelling that exists at the boundary between the human world and whatever realm she truly comes from. He will eat the food she provides, food that tastes better than anything produced by mortal hands, but slowly changes him, makes him less able to tolerate the company of other humans, more comfortable in the green dimness than in sunlit villages. He will share her bed, and the stories are carefully silent about what that entails, what intimacy with a being who is hollow behind actually means. And he must never look at her back again. Even having accepted it once, even having passed the initial test, he is not permitted to examine or question or dwell on her otherness. That is the final condition, the rule that governs every account of men who live with the Huldra. Turn your eyes away from what you know is there. Love the front and forget the back. Exist in a permanent state of willful blindness, of chosen ignorance. Some men manage this. Some find that the benefits, whatever they are, outweigh the cost of living a half-truth. Others eventually break, look at the wrong moment, ask the wrong question, and discover that acceptance is not a permanent state, but a continuous performance that can fail at any moment. The secret behind is not merely a physical detail then. It is a test and a metaphor and a trap all at once. It separates those who can adapt from those who cannot, those who can live with ambiguity from those who need clarity, those who can love something despite or because of its fundamental strangeness from those who require the familiar and the safe. And it ensures that even the men who pass the test, who accept and stay and build lives in the shadow of her mystery, never fully escape the knowledge of what she is. The tail swishes. The hollow back presses against theirs in the darkness. The truth is always there, always present, always demanding that they ignore it. That is the real revelation, the deepest secret. Not what she is, but what she requires you to become in order to remain with her. The Scandinavian peninsula is not a monolith. Though Norway and Sweden share borders, mountains, and a common linguistic heritage, they are separated by something deeper than geography, divided by differences in temperament and tradition that have shaped their folklore in fundamentally distinct ways. The Huldra who dwells in Norwegian forests is not quite the same being as her Swedish counterpart. And this divergence reveals something crucial about how different cultures project their fears and desires onto the same mythological template. In Norway, the Huldra occupies a space that is ambiguous, dangerous, yes, but not inherently malevolent. She is a force to be reckoned with, a being whose power demands respect. But she is also capable of something approaching kindness, even affection, under the right circumstances. The Norwegian accounts preserved in regional folklore collections describe encounters that follow a pattern distinctly different from the Swedish tales. A man ventures into the forest, a woodcutter perhaps, felling trees for timber, or a charcoal burner tending his smoking mound in some remote clearing. Days pass in isolation. The only sounds the crack of his axe or the whisper of wind through pine branches. Then she appears. She does not immediately seduce or threaten. Instead, she observes, assesses, judges the character of the man before her. Is he respectful of the forest? Does he take only what he needs? Or does he exploit with careless greed? Does he move through her domain with the humility appropriate to a guest? Or does he swagger with the arrogance of one who believes himself master? These questions mattered to the Norwegian Huldra. She is not a mindless predator, but a conscious guardian, a being with agency and judgment, who responds to human behavior rather than acting from blind instinct. If the man passes this invisible assessment, if he proves himself worthy in ways he may not even understand, she makes an offer. Food appears, bread and cheese and sometimes meat, rich and filling in a way that defies the limited resources of a forest camp. She may speak to him, her voice gentle now rather than seductive, offering companionship in the long isolation. She might help with his work, guiding him to the best trees for timber or showing him where game is plentiful. The relationship that develops, if it can be called that, operates on terms of mutual benefit. He receives aid and comfort. She receives acknowledgement, respect, perhaps simply the pleasure of interaction with a human who does not immediately flee or attack. The crucial element in these Norwegian accounts is the secret kept. The man who accepts her presence, who eats her food and shares her company, inevitably discovers her true, the tail or the hollow back or both. But if he chooses silence, if he looks at these impossible features and says nothing, shows no revulsion, simply continues as though he has seen nothing unusual, she allows the relationship to continue. He can live with her in the forest, in some dwelling that exists at the boundary between the natural and the supernatural. He can share her life, whatever that means for a being who is not quite human and not quite spirit. Some tales suggest these unions produce children, strange offspring who inherit their mother's connection to the wild but can pass, with effort, in human society. The Norwegian Huldra rewards loyalty and discretion with prosperity. The man who keeps her secret finds that his work goes smoothly, his traps always full, his timber always prime quality. She might even follow him back to human settlements, invisible to others, continuing to provide aid and protection as long as he maintains the covenant of silence. But betrayal carries consequences. The man who reveals her, who speaks of the tail or the hollow back to others, who laughs about it or boasts of his conquest of a troll woman, discovers that her vengeance is swift and comprehensive. His luck turns. His crops fail. His animals sicken. He himself may fall prey to accidents that seem natural, but occur with suspicious frequency. She does not forgive exposure. Cross the mountains into Sweden, and the story darkens considerably. The Swedish Skogsrå, though bearing the same essential features as her Norwegian sister, operates from a different set of motivations and constraints. Here, the folklore emphasizes her predatory her role as active threat rather than ambiguous guardian. She still appears beautiful, still sings with that hypnotic voice, still draws men deeper into the forest with promises, implicit and explicit. But the Swedish tales rarely end with domestic arrangements or mutual benefit. They end with death, specifically with drowning. The Swedish Huldra lures men toward water. not the clear mountain streams of Norwegian highland, but marshes, bogs, those treacherous wetlands that dot the Swedish landscape. Places where solid ground gives way without warning to sucking mud and cold, dark water that closes over a man's head before he can cry out. She appears at the edge of such places, her beauty magnified by the eerie light that plays across stagnant pools, her voice echoing strangely in the fog that rises from decaying vegetation. The men who follow her lose all sense of direction, all awareness of danger. They see only her, hear only her song, and they walk forward into spaces where no rational person would venture. By the time they realize the deception, by the time the ground turns soft beneath their feet and the water rises to their knees and then their waist and then their chest, it is far too late. She watches from solid ground, if she watches at all, her expression unreadable. Some accounts suggest she laughs, a sound like wind through dead reeds, cruel and utterly without mercy. Others claim she simply disappears, her purpose fulfilled, leaving the man to his fate. Either way, the result is the same. The forest claims another victim, another body that will eventually be found bloated and mud-stained, or perhaps never found at all. Just another disappearance in a landscape that has been swallowing the unwary for millennia. The Swedish folklore includes fewer accounts of men living with the Skogsrå, fewer stories of domestic arrangements or offspring. When such relationships do occur, they are portrayed as traps rather than partnerships. The man becomes her prisoner, held through enchantment or simple geographical isolation, unable to leave even if he wishes to, slowly losing his connection to human society until he is more forest creature than man. His family searches but never finds him. Years later, if he is seen at all, he is glimpsed at a distance, wild-haired and strange-eyed, moving through the trees with inhuman grace, no longer quite recognizable as the person he once was. Why this difference? Why does the same essential being manifest as potential partner in Norway and active killer in Sweden? The answer lies partly in geography and partly in cultural memory. Norwegian forests, though vast and dangerous, were spaces that had to be actively used. Timber extraction, charcoal production, hunting. These were necessary economic activities that required men to spend extended time in the wilderness. The folklore had to accommodate this reality, had to provide a framework for understanding how one could work in the forest and survive. The Huldra becomes, in this context, a personification of the forest's rules. Respect her, acknowledge her primacy, keep her secrets, and you can coexist. Violate these terms and face the consequences. Swedish wetlands, by contrast, were spaces to be avoided, barriers rather than resources. The bogs produced nothing of value and claimed lives with disturbing regularity. Bodies disappeared into peat, preserved for centuries, discovered by later generations as leathery remnants that testified to the danger of straying from safe paths. The Skogsrå who dwells near these places embodies not the rules of sustainable use, but the absolute prohibition. Stay out. Do not enter. Those who ignore this warning, who allow themselves to be seduced into treacherous ground, die. The folklore serves as cautionary tale, stark and unambiguous. Yet both versions, Norwegian and Swedish, agree on certain fundamentals. The Huldra, regardless of her temperament or methodology, is tied to the forest, derives her power from it, and serves as its representative in interactions with humanity. She is beautiful because beauty is the most effective lure, the bait that bypasses rational thought and pulls at deeper, older parts of the human psyche. She is dangerous because the wild is dangerous, because venturing into spaces that are not yours carries inherent risk. And she demands recognition, acknowledgement that you are entering a realm governed by laws that predate human civilization and will persist long after it crumbles. The man who encounters her, whether in Norwegian pine forest or Swedish wetland, faces the same fundamental choice, merely dressed in different outcomes. Will you respect what you do not understand? Or will you react with the arrogance of assumed superiority? Will you acknowledge that beauty can coexist with otherness? That something can be desirable and alien simultaneously? Or will you demand that everything conform to your categories, your definitions, your comfort? The Norwegian Huldra offers relationship to those who pass this test. The Swedish Skogsrå offers death to those who fail it. Same lesson, different pedagogical methods. The forest, in all its forms, will be respected, or it will teach you respect through suffering. Those are the only options it has ever offered. The folklore of Scandinavia is filled with rules, invisible boundaries that govern the relationship between human and other. These are not written laws, not commandments carved in stone or recorded in holy books, but something older and more fundamental. They are the protocols of survival in a world where two realities overlap, where the everyday and the impossible occupy the same space and must somehow coexist without destroying each other. The Huldra, like all beings of the hidden world, operates according to such rules, and the man who encounters her must learn them instantly in the moment of crisis or pay with everything he has. The first law is silence, not the silence of intimidation or fear, though both are certainly present, but the silence of acceptance, of acknowledgement that what you are seeing defies your categories, and you will not attempt to force it into familiar shapes through words. When you see the tail, the hollow back, the impossible fusion of human and animal and tree, your instinct screams at you to name it, to shout the revelation, to make the wrongness explicit through language. This is the trap. The moment you give voice to your horror, the moment you say aloud what your eyes have shown you, you break the covenant that allows the encounter to continue. She is offering you knowledge, showing you the truth beneath the beautiful surface. And your response determines whether that truth becomes shared secret or declaration of war. Speak and you die. The accounts are unanimous on this point, recorded across centuries from isolated farmsteads and forest camps throughout Norway and Sweden. The man who sees her otherness and cries out in shock or disgust signs his own death warrant in that instant. She turns on him with fury that seems disproportionate until you understand what his outburst represents. He has rejected her, yes, but more than that, he has refused the gift of deeper sight, the invitation to see beyond surfaces and still choose connection. His scream is judgment, condemnation, the assertion that she is monstrous rather than merely different. For a being who is neither human nor animal, but something that transcends both categories, this rejection cuts to the core of existence itself. What follows is violence, swift and terrible. The folklore does not shy away from the details, does not soften the consequences of broken protocol. Men are found with limbs torn from their bodies, bones shattered as though crushed by enormous pressure, faces frozen in expressions of terminal horror. These are not quick deaths granted in mercy, but prolonged demonstrations of what happens when you mistake hospitality for weakness, when you see the sacred and respond with contempt. The forest claims the body if there is enough left to claim, and the story circulates as warning to the next generation. Do not scream. Do not recoil. Do not name what you have seen. But silence alone is not enough. The second law is acceptance, and this is where the true test begins. It is one thing to swallow your horror, to keep your mouth shut through sheer force of will or paralyzing fear. It is another thing entirely to look at the impossible and choose it anyway. To see the tail or the hollow back and decide that this changes nothing essential about your willingness to remain in her presence. Acceptance is active, not passive. It requires you to continue the interaction as though nothing has shifted, to eat the food she offers, to respond to her questions, to meet her eyes with something other than barely controlled panic. The men who manage this, who see and accept and stay, enter into a relationship that has no equivalent in normal human experience. She binds them to her, through means the folklore never fully explains, whether through genuine affection or magical compulsion, or simply the weight of shared knowledge that cannot be unshared. They live with her in the forest, in dwellings that exist at the boundary between the natural world and whatever realm she truly inhabits. Some accounts describe these places as ordinary huts or caves, made strange only by their isolation. Others hint at spaces that shift and change, that are larger inside than outside, that seem to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Life with a Huldra operates according to the third law, the law of perpetual ignorance. You have seen her secret once, in that initial moment of revelation, and that sight has bound you to her. But you must never look again. Never examine the tail too closely. Never trace with your eyes the edge where flesh gives way to bark. Never ask questions about her or her origins or what she truly is beneath the human face she wears. You must exist in a state of chosen blindness, acknowledging what you know while simultaneously pretending not to know it. This is the price of acceptance, the cost of living in the threshold space between human and other. The psychological strain of this arrangement breaks some men. They last weeks or months before the cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. They look when they should not look, speak when they should remain silent, demand answers to questions that have no answers compatible with human understanding. When the covenant breaks, whether through intention or accident, she does not always kill. Sometimes she simply releases them, sending them back to human settlements with memories that fragment and scatter, leaving only vague unease and dreams that wake them gasping in the darkness. These men are marked, changed in ways their communities recognize without understanding, treated with suspicion and kept at distance. Others adapt. They learn to live in the permanent tension of known secret and enforced forgetting. They become half-wild themselves, more comfortable in the forest than in village squares, more fluent in the language of wind and water than in human speech. Their children, if there are children, inherit this duality, belonging fully to neither world, navigating constantly between the expectations of human society and the call of something older that runs in their blood. The folklore suggests these offspring possess unusual gifts, abilities that mark them as different even when they try to pass as normal. They can see things others cannot, hear voices in the forest that speak truths, move through the wilderness with uncanny skill. The fourth law is loyalty. The man who accepts the Huldra, who lives with her and keeps her secrets, becomes her defender against the outside world. He must never betray her to others, never use his knowledge of her as currency or boast or cautionary tale. The farmer who returns to his village and speaks of the woman with the cow's tail who lives in the northern woods discovers that some betrayals cannot be survived. His crops fail despite good weather. His animals sicken for no reason veterinarians can diagnose. He himself falls prey to accidents that seem natural, but occur with suspicious timing and frequency. She does not need to be present to exact revenge. The forest itself becomes her weapon, turned against the one who broke faith. But loyalty rewarded brings prosperity. The charcoal burner who keeps her secret finds his mounds burn perfectly, producing coal of exceptional quality that commands premium prices. The hunter who never speaks of his forest companion finds game practically offering itself to his traps, as though the animals themselves understand that they are meant for him. The woodsman discovers the best timber, trees that split clean and straight, wood that seems to know its purpose before the axe ever touches bark. She provides for those who honor the covenant, not from gratitude perhaps, but from a sense of balance, of maintaining the relationship that benefits both parties. The final law, the one that underlies all others, is respect, not love, though that may develop, not fear, though that is certainly present, but respect, acknowledgement that she is a sovereign being in her own realm, that the forest belongs to her in ways it will never belong to humanity, that your presence here is conditional on her tolerance. The man who walks through the woods with arrogance, who takes more than he needs, who treats the trees and animals and streams as mere resources to be exploited, marks himself as enemy. The man who moves with humility, who acknowledges with gesture or word that he is guest rather than master, who leaves offerings of food or milk at the forest edge, aligns himself with protocols older than his culture. These laws are not arbitrary. They emerge from the fundamental reality of the situation, from the fact that humans and Huldra occupy different positions in the hierarchy of being. She is tied to the forest in ways that make her nearly immortal, certainly more durable than any individual human. She has seen generations come and go, has watched kingdoms rise and fall, has endured through climate shifts and cultural revolutions that would destroy lesser beings. You, by contrast, are ephemeral, a brief flicker of consciousness that will be gone in decades while she remains, eternal and watching. The laws acknowledge this imbalance and provide framework for interaction that protects both parties. Acceptance, then, is not a single choice made in a moment of crisis. It is a continuous performance, a daily decision to honor the covenant, to maintain the careful balance between seeing and not seeing, knowing and not knowing, being present while remaining aware of your fundamental foreignness to this space. Some men find this arrangement liberating, a release from the rigid categories and expectations of human society. Others experience it as prison, golden perhaps, but confining nonetheless. Either way, once the choice is made, once you see the tale and choose to stay, there is no simple path back to the life you knew before. The forest has claimed you through her, and the forest does not easily release what it considers its own. There is one path, and only one, by which the Huldra can shed her otherness and become fully human. It does not involve magic spells or ancient rituals passed down from the pre-Christian era, does not require pilgrimages to sacred groves or sacrifices offered to forgotten gods. The path runs through the church, through the same stone buildings with their bells and crosses that spread across Scandinavia as the old ways retreated into memory. Marriage, sanctified by Christian rites, performed within consecrated walls by a priest who speaks the words that bind man and woman before God. This is the transformation that folklore claims can strip away her animal and grant her entry into the human world. The mechanism is described with remarkable consistency across the folklore collections. The man who has accepted her, who lives with her in the forest and keeps her secret, must convince her to marry him in a church, according to Christian law. This is not a simple proposal, not a romantic declaration followed by joyful acceptance. She resists initially and often violently, because she understands what he perhaps does not. The marriage will unmake her, will destroy the essence of what she is and replace it with something fundamentally different. She is being asked to die so that a human woman can be born wearing her face. And no being, however inhuman, approaches such transformation without fear. But love, if what exists between them can be called love, or desire for legitimacy, or simple exhaustion with the liminal existence of living between worlds, eventually overcomes resistance. She agrees. They leave the forest together, her tail carefully hidden beneath layers of skirt, her hollow back concealed by the traditional dress that makes her look like any other woman heading to her wedding. The villagers who see them arrive at the church do not know what walks among them, do not recognize the forest spirit in this demure bride. They see only another couple, another union to be blessed and recorded in the parish register. The ceremony proceeds according to established forms. The priest speaks the ancient words, the ones that have been spoken at countless weddings, that invoke God's blessing on the union and bind the couple in holy matrimony. The man takes his vows. The woman, the Huldra, speaks her agreement in a voice that sounds almost human, almost convincing. Rings are exchanged if the couple has means to afford them, or simple words of commitment if they do not. The priest pronounces them married before God and witnesses. And in that moment, the transformation begins. She feels it immediately, according to the accounts that describe this process. A sensation like fire running down her spine, concentrated at the base where the tail emerges from flesh. The connection that has always been there, natural as breathing, fundamental as heartbeat, suddenly weakens, frays, begins to dissolve. The tail, whether cow or fox, twitches violently once, twice, and then simply detaches. It falls away, dropping to the church floor with a soft sound that nobody else seems to hear or notice. She gasps, not from pain exactly, but from the shock of sudden absence, of losing something that was part of her body and her identity since whatever moment or process brought her into existence. The hollow back fills simultaneously, a rushing sensation as though flesh and bone and muscle are pouring into the void that defined her otherness. She can feel her spine solidifying, vertebrae knitting together in configurations that are properly human, the bark-like edges smoothing into skin that is warm and living rather than dead wood. Within seconds, perhaps less, the transformation is complete. Where a being of the forest stood, neither fully human nor fully beast, now stands a woman, ordinary and mortal, distinguished from her neighbors only by unusual beauty and eyes that still hold depths no purely human gaze should contain. The folklore treats this transformation as miracle and tragedy in equal measure. From the perspective of Christian doctrine, it is redemption, the taming of pagan wildness through the sanctifying power of the Church. The Huldra was a creature of the old world, tied to beliefs and practices that the new faith sought to eradicate or absorb. Her transformation represents the triumph of Christianity over the lingering spirits of pre-Christian Scandinavia, the domestication of the wild through holy matrimony. She has been saved, brought into the fold, made acceptable and proper and safe. But the folklore, even as it records this narrative of Christian victory, cannot quite suppress the sense of profound loss. What has been gained in humanity has been purchased through the destruction of something unique and irreplaceable. The Huldra was the forest made flesh, the personification of wild places and their alien beauty. She existed at the intersection of categories, belonging fully to none, and that liminality gave her power and purpose. As a human woman, she is diminished, reduced to a single category, stripped of the multiplicity that made her extraordinary. She can no longer command the animals, cannot move through the forest with supernatural grace, cannot sing the songs that bypassed human language and spoke directly to something older in the soul. She becomes a farmer's wife or a charcoal burner's partner, living in a cottage at the forest edge or in some village where her unusual origins are known but politely ignored. She bears children who are fully human, lacking the gifts and curses that would have marked the offspring of her previous liminal state. She cooks and cleans and tends animals like any other woman of her time and station. The extraordinary beauty remains, fading slowly as normal aging claims her. And sometimes villagers remark on her eyes, on the way they seem to look through rather than at the world. But these are minor oddities, easily dismissed, nothing that marks her as fundamentally different from the other women who draw water and bake bread and raise children in these northern lands. Does she mourn what she has lost? The folklore is largely silent on this question, but occasional details hint at grief too profound for direct expression. She is described as melancholy, given to long silences, prone to walking alone at the forest edge and staring into the depths as though searching for something she can no longer name. Sometimes she sings, not the hypnotic melodies of her forest days, but simple folk songs, human music. And there is something in her voice that makes listeners uncomfortable without understanding why. It sounds, they say, like longing for a home she can never return to, for a self that was destroyed the moment the priest pronounced her married and the tale fell away. There are cautionary elements woven through these transformation narratives. Some accounts warn that the marriage must be genuine, entered into with true intent, or the transformation will not hold. A man who marries the Huldra merely to possess her, to claim ownership over something wild and beautiful, may find that she reverts to her original form at some crucial moment, the tail growing back, the hollow back reopening, all the careful domestication undone in an instant. Others suggest that she retains certain powers even after transformation, particularly the ability to curse those who wrong her or her family, to call down forest vengeance on enemies who think themselves safe because she now wears human form. The transformation narrative reveals something crucial about how medieval and early modern Scandinavian culture understood the relationship between Christianity and the older pagan world. The forest spirits, the Huldra and her kin, were not simply destroyed or banished by the new faith. They were offered conversion, redemption through integration into Christian social structures. Marriage becomes the mechanism of assimilation, the process by which the wild is tamed and made acceptable. The Church does not deny the existence of these beings, but claims power over them, the ability to unmake and remake them in forms compatible with Christian order. Yet there is ambivalence in these tales, a recognition that something vital is lost in the process. The wild has value, even if that value is dangerous and disruptive. The Huldra as forest spirit serves purposes that the Huldra as human wife cannot. She maintained boundaries, enforced respect for the natural world, reminded humans that not everything could or should be domesticated. Her transformation into ordinary woman removes a check on human expansion, eliminates a voice that spoke for spaces beyond human control. The forest loses its guardian, its embodied sovereignty, and becomes merely timber and game, resources to be exploited without spiritual consequence. Modern readers might see in these transformation narratives a metaphor for the pressures faced by women to conform, to sacrifice wildness and independence for social acceptability. The Huldra who enters the church is asked to give up everything that makes her unique, to destroy her essential in exchange for legitimacy and belonging. She must become small, ordinary, safe, must fit herself into roles and expectations that were never designed for beings like her. The tail and the hollow back are not deformities to be corrected, but markers of difference, of existence outside normal categories, and their removal is amputation rather than healing. The path through the church remains, in the folklore, the only sanctioned transformation, the only way for the Huldra to cross permanently from one world to the other. There are no accounts of reverse transformations, of human women gaining tails and hollow backs and supernatural power through some ritual or bargain. The movement is unidirectional, from wild to tame, from forest to village, from multiplicity to singular category. And once walked, the path cannot be retraced. The woman standing at the altar, feeling her tail drop away and her back fill with mortal flesh, is crossing a threshold that has no return. Whatever she becomes in that moment, she can never again be what she was. The forest will remember her, perhaps, but it will not reclaim her. She belongs now to the human world, with all its limitations and small comforts, and the wild she once embodied continues without her, waiting for the next wanderer to stumble into its depths and face the choice that has been offered for 1,000 years. The Huldra is not merely a seductress dwelling in the forest shadows, not simply a dangerous beauty who lures men to uncertain fates. She is sovereign of the woodland realm, its appointed guardian, the living embodiment of the forest's will and its capacity for retaliation against those who treat it with contempt. To understand her fully, you must see past the beautiful face and the secret tale, past the mythology of seduction and transformation, to recognize her fundamental role as protector of a realm that humans entered only as guests and increasingly treated as property to be exploited without consequence. The forests of Scandinavia were never empty wilderness waiting for human civilization to give them purpose. They were ecosystems of profound complexity, home to wolves and bears and lynx, to elk and deer and countless smaller creatures, to trees that had stood for centuries before the first Viking longship touched water. These forests provided timber for building, fuel for heating, game for eating, medicinal plants for healing. They were resource and barrier simultaneously, wealth and danger intertwined so thoroughly that no one could extract the benefits without acknowledging the risks. For generations, the people who lived at the forest edge understood this balance. They took what they needed, but no more, operated according to unwritten protocols that governed how much timber could be felled, how many animals hunted, which areas left untouched to regenerate. These were not laws enforced by human authority, but something deeper. Rules that emerged from accumulated observation of what the forest could sustain and what would damage it beyond recovery. Violate these protocols and consequences followed, not always immediately, but inevitably. The Huldra enforced these rules. She was the forest's immune system, its active defense against the disease of human greed. A woodsman who took only the trees he needed for his own use, who felled with skill and left the forest floor clean, who showed respect through gesture or offering, might work for years without incident. He might even encounter her and find her benevolent, helpful, willing to guide him to the best timber or warn him away from dangerous areas. But the man who came with different intentions, who saw the forest as mere resource to be extracted for maximum profit, who took without gratitude and left destruction in his wake, that man made himself her enemy. The accounts of her punishment are consistent across regions and centuries. The greedy woodsman finds that his work goes wrong in ways that seem like bad luck, but accumulate too quickly to be coincidence. His axe blade chips or breaks, despite being newly sharpened. Trees fall in unexpected directions, nearly crushing him, or actually succeeding where nearly would have been warning enough. His cart overturns on level ground, scattering the day's timber into ravines where recovery is impossible. He becomes lost in forests he has worked for years, trails vanishing as though they never existed. Familiar landmarks shifting and changing until he wanders in circles for hours or days. Worse things happen to those who persist despite warnings. Injuries that should heal fester and spread. Fever sets in without apparent cause, burning through the body, leaving the victim weak and broken. Animals that should flee instead attack, bears appearing where they have no reason to be. Wolves circling camps with intent that has nothing to do with normal predator behavior. The forest itself seems to turn hostile, branches whipping across faces with force that exceeds what wind can explain, roots rising to trip and break ankles, streams swelling suddenly to dangerous levels that sweep away tools and supplies. She does not always work through indirect means. Some accounts describe direct confrontation, the Huldra appearing before the offending woodsman not in seductive guise, but in aspect of fury. Her beauty becomes terrifying rather than attractive. Her eyes blazing with inhuman rage, her voice no longer the hypnotic song, but a sound like wind through dead trees, like the crack of breaking timber, like the scream of dying animals. She speaks judgment, cataloging his offenses against the forest, listing each unnecessary tree felled, each wasteful practice, each act of disrespect. Then she delivers sentence. What happens next varies by account and presumably by the severity of the offense. Minor transgressors might be driven from the forest, forbidden to return, cursed with ill fortune that follows them back to their villages. Serious offenders face physical punishment, beatings that leave them broken and bleeding, lucky to crawl back to human settlements with their lives. The worst cases, those who have shown utter contempt for the forest and its laws, simply disappear. Search parties find no trace, no body, no sign of struggle. The forest has claimed them completely, absorbed them into itself, and they are never seen again. Her role as punisher extends beyond individual woodsmen to entire operations. There are accounts of logging camps plagued by misfortune after the owners ordered excessive cutting, taking more than the forest could sustain. Workers fell ill with mysterious ailments that defy treatment. Equipment fails catastrophically. Wagons losing wheels, ropes snapping under loads they should easily handle. Horses refusing to enter certain areas despite beatings and threats. The camp cook finds food spoiling overnight, despite being properly stored. Water sources that were pure turn foul. Small fires escape control and threaten to consume the entire operation. Eventually, if the logging continues despite mounting evidence of supernatural opposition, she appears. Not to seduce, but to confront, making her presence and her displeasure unmistakable. The camp boss, who dismisses such appearances as superstition, who orders work to continue despite the warnings, often becomes the focus of her wrath. He suffers accidents that seem targeted, injuries that incapacitate without killing, a prolonged demonstration that she can reach him whenever she chooses. Smart operators recognize the signs and move their camps to less sensitive areas, leaving certain groves and valleys untouched. Stubborn ones learn through suffering or do not live long enough to learn at all. But her guardianship is not purely negative, not only about punishment and prohibition. She rewards those who show proper respect, who take only what they need, who acknowledge her sovereignty through offering and gesture. The charcoal burner who leaves milk or bread at the forest edge before beginning his work finds his mounds burn evenly, producing exceptional quality coal. The hunter who thanks the forest for each animal taken, who uses every part and wastes nothing, discovers game appearing as though offering itself. His aim true, his traps always full. She guides those who have earned her favor to the best resources the forest can provide. A stand of timber perfectly suited to the builder's needs, mature and ready for harvest, conveniently located near paths that make transport feasible. Medicinal herbs growing in abundance exactly when the village healer needs them most. Mushrooms appearing in quantities that can feed families through lean times. These are not coincidences, but gifts. Acknowledgement that the relationship between human and forest can be reciprocal rather than purely exploitative. There are accounts of her actively protecting those under her care. A woodsman lost in a sudden snowstorm finds shelter in a cave he swears was not there before. Wakes to discover himself safely near the forest edge with no memory of walking there. A hunter pursued by wolves hears her voice guiding him to safety, leading him through paths that close behind him, leaving the predators confused and unable to follow. A child wandered from home is found sleeping peacefully in a clearing, unharmed despite spending a night in woods full of dangers, speaking of a beautiful woman who sang him to sleep and promised he would be found. The Huldra as guardian represents a worldview fundamentally different from the one that came to dominate as industrialization spread across Scandinavia. She embodies the principle that has rights, that the forest is not merely resource, but entity deserving respect and protection. Her punishment of those who overexploit or show contempt enforces a kind of sustainability that predates modern environmental movements by centuries. Take only what you need, the folklore teaches through her actions. Show gratitude for what is given. Recognize that you are guest, not master, in spaces that existed before you and will endure after you are gone. In this role, she becomes something more than individual being. She is the personified conscience of a culture struggling to maintain balance between use and abuse of natural resources. When woodsmen spoke of the Huldra's anger at excessive logging, they were articulating an environmental ethic through the language of folklore. When they left offerings to appease her, they were engaging in ritual that reinforced sustainable practices, that reminded them and their communities of limits that should not be transgressed. The modern environmental crisis, with its catastrophic deforestation and ecosystem collapse, might have looked different if the Huldra's lessons had been heeded more widely. The forests she guarded are largely gone now, cleared for farmland or logged to exhaustion, their complex ecosystems reduced to managed plantations or recreational parks. There is no guardian left to punish those who take too much. No supernatural force enforcing the protocols of sustainable use. We have killed the Huldra through disbelief and development. And the forests are dying with her. One clear-cut hillside at a time, one more species pushed to extinction. One more generation that will never know what was lost. The cow's tail that emerges from beneath her skirt, that swishes and betrays her otherness to the careful observer, is not arbitrary detail or random grotesquerie added to make her more monstrous. It is symbolic marker, deliberate signifier of a connection that runs deeper than mere physical resemblance. The Huldra, for all her association with deep forests and wild spaces, maintains intimate relationship with domesticated cattle, with the herds that represented wealth and survival for Scandinavian farmers. She is simultaneously creature of untamed wilderness and guardian of agricultural prosperity, bridging two worlds that humans tried to keep separate, but that she proved were always interconnected. In the high mountain pastures of Norway and Sweden, where cattle were driven each summer to graze on vegetation too remote for permanent settlement. Herders told stories of encountering massive herds that appeared and vanished like morning mist. These were not ordinary cattle, but supernatural beasts, larger and more perfect than any mortal breeding could produce. Their coats glossy with impossible health, their eyes holding an intelligence that made the herders uncomfortable. The animals moved in formation, coordinated as though responding to signals no human could hear. And at their head or within their midst, sometimes visible and sometimes not, walked the Huldra. She commanded these wild herds with absolute authority, guiding them through mountain passes that would have been impassable for normal cattle, leading them to grazing grounds hidden in valleys that appeared on no map and could not be found by those who searched for them later. The herds were hers, part of the forest realm's wealth, resources that belonged to the wild rather than to human agriculture. They represented what cattle could be without domestication, without the diminishment that came from generations of breeding for docility and milk production rather than for the fierce vitality that characterized truly wild creatures. Encounters with these supernatural herds carried both opportunity and danger. A herder who stumbled upon them while searching for his own strayed cattle faced a choice similar to the woodsman who encountered the Huldra herself. Show respect. Acknowledge her sovereignty over these animals. Retreat without attempting to claim or capture what was clearly not his, and he might find blessings following him back to his own herd. His cattle would thrive inexplicably, producing more milk than their feed should allow, bearing calves with unusual vigor, remaining healthy through winters that killed the stock of less fortunate neighbors. But the herder who saw the wild cattle and thought only of profit, who attempted to drive some of them away to add to his own herd, who viewed them as resources to be stolen rather than marvels to be respected, discovered the full weight of her wrath. His own cattle would sicken immediately, struck by diseases that had no natural explanation and responded to no treatment. Milk would sour in the udder before it could be drawn. Calves would be born dead or so weak they could not stand. The herd that had been his wealth and security would dwindle and die, and no amount of care or expenditure could reverse the curse she had placed upon him. The folklore records numerous accounts of farmers who earned her favor through proper treatment of their animals. The man who fed his cattle well, who provided shelter and clean water, who never beat or overworked the beasts, who spoke to them gently and treated them as living creatures deserving care rather than mere property. This man might wake one morning to find his herd increased by one. A new cow, larger and healthier than any he owned, standing among his animals as though she had always been there. This was the Huldra's gift, a single animal from her supernatural herd, breeding stock that would improve his entire line, a reward for demonstrating the values she honored. These gifted cattle were marked by their exceptional qualities. They produced twice the milk of normal cows, cream so rich it seemed almost solid, butter that had flavor unlike anything achieved through ordinary churning. Their calves were invariably healthy, growing faster and stronger than their peers, commanding premium prices at market if the farmer chose to sell them. But there were conditions attached to these gifts, unspoken rules that governed the relationship between the farmer and the supernatural cattle. He must never mistreat the gifted animal, never strike it in anger, never withhold food or water, never work it beyond reasonable limits. The Huldra was watching, always watching, and she would know immediately if her gift was being abused. More subtly, he must never boast about the animal's origins, never tell neighbors or strangers that his prize cow came from the forest spirit's herd. The gift required secrecy, discretion, the same protocol of silence that governed all dealings with the hidden world. Violation of these terms meant not only loss of the gifted animal, which would simply disappear one night as mysteriously as it had arrived, but also curse upon the entire herd and potentially upon the farmer himself. The connection between the Huldra and cattle extends beyond her role as giver of supernatural stock. She served as protector of all herds within her territory, guardian against both natural and supernatural threats. Wolves that preyed on cattle learned to avoid herds under her protection, turning away as though encountering invisible barriers. Thieves who attempted to steal animals at night found themselves hopelessly lost, wandering in circles until dawn revealed them still within sight of the farm they had tried to rob, confused and terrified by their inability to navigate terrain that should have been simple. Disease that swept through neighboring regions might spare the cattle of farmers who had honored her through offerings or respectful behavior. The protection was not absolute, not a guarantee against all misfortune, but it tipped the scales toward survival, gave herds slightly better odds of enduring the catastrophes that regularly decimated agricultural communities in pre-modern Scandinavia. In cultures where cattle represented the difference between prosperity and starvation, where a herd's health determined whether a family survived the winter or perished, this protection had value beyond calculation. Yet her patronage of cattle created theological problems for the Christian authorities who worked to eliminate pagan practices from Scandinavian culture. The Huldra represented the old ways, the belief that supernatural beings controlled aspects of life that the church insisted belonged under God's providence alone. Farmers who left offerings for her, who attributed their herd's health to her favor rather than to Christian prayer, were engaging in practices the church defined as idolatry or witchcraft. Priests preached against making offerings to forest spirits, declared that any prosperity came from God alone, and that attributing it to pagan entities was blasphemy. They warned that the Huldra's gifts were actually demonic temptations, that cattle received from her were infected with evil that would ultimately corrupt the entire herd and the soul of the farmer who accepted them. Some went further, claiming that the supernatural cattle were actually demons in animal form, sent to infiltrate Christian households and open them to satanic influence. But folk practice proved remarkably resistant to official doctrine. Farmers continued leaving offerings at the forest edge, milk poured onto the ground or bread left on stones, accompanied by mumbled requests for protection of their herds. They might attend church on Sunday and recite Christian prayers, but on Monday they honored protocols older than Christianity, protocols they believed worked regardless of what priests said about them. The dual practice reflected a pragmatic approach to religion. Why risk offending a powerful entity simply because church doctrine claimed she did not exist or had no power? Better to honor both the Christian God and the forest spirits, covering all possibilities, ensuring protection from all potential sources. The Huldra's bovine tail, then, becomes multivalent symbol. It marks her as other, as something that cannot be fully human despite her beautiful face. It connects her to the wealth and survival represented by cattle in agricultural societies. It bridges the wild and the domestic, reminding observers that these categories are less separate than humans like to believe. The forest and the farm exist on a continuum, not in opposition, and the Huldra embodies that continuity. Her role as mistress of cattle also reveals her as liminal figure in another sense. She is neither purely natural nor purely agricultural, neither completely wild nor completely civilized. She exists at the boundary, the threshold where forest meets pasture, where wild herds encounter domesticated ones, where the rules of wilderness begin to accommodate human needs without fully surrendering to them. This is uncomfortable space for cultures that prefer clear categories and firm boundaries. But it is the space she has always occupied, and from that position, she exercises influence over both realms. In the vast archive of Scandinavian folklore, collected over centuries from isolated farmsteads and remote villages, recorded by priests and scholars and amateur enthusiasts, the accounts of the Huldra number in the thousands. Stories of encounters, warnings passed from generation to generation, detailed descriptions of her appearance and behavior. These fill volumes and dominate the category of forest spirits in Norwegian and Swedish tradition. But search those same archives for accounts of her male counterpart, the Huldra, and you will find almost nothing, a handful of brief mentions, vague references that raise more questions than they answer. Silence where you expect to find mirror image of the well-documented female. The Huldra exists in the folklore, but as shadow rather than substance, as rumor rather than established presence. He is mentioned occasionally as the Huldra's husband or companion, a male figure who inhabits the same forest realm but remains largely invisible to human observers. Some accounts describe him as similar into the female, possessing the same dual, beautiful from the front and marked by animal features from behind. Others suggest he is less human in appearance, more beast than the female, as though the masculine version of the forest spirit requires less pretense of humanity to fulfill whatever function he serves. Why this dramatic imbalance? Why does Scandinavian folklore produce thousands of accounts of female forest spirits, but barely acknowledges the existence of their male counterparts? The answer reveals something fundamental about how these cultures understood both the forest and the feminine, about what threatened them and what fascinated them, about the anxieties that shaped their mythology and the silences that structured their narratives. The forest, in the Norse imagination, was gendered feminine long before the Huldra emerged as its personification. The woods were unpredictable, seductive, dangerous in ways that seemed to invite specifically masculine transgression. Men entered the forest for work, for resources, for the hunt, and in doing so they crossed from the masculine domain of cultivation and construction into territory that operated by different rules, that demanded different protocols, that feminized them through its power to seduce and destroy. The Huldra as female forest spirit makes perfect sense within this framework. She is the forest made flesh, and the forest was always understood as she. But what role would a male forest spirit serve in this mythology? Men already occupied the role of intruder, of one who enters the feminine realm and must navigate its dangers. A Huldra would disrupt this dynamic, would create confusion about who is native to the forest and who is trespasser, who seduces and who is seduced. The folklore, it seems, could not accommodate this complexity, could not make room for a masculine presence that would complicate the clear gender coding of wild versus civilized, forest versus farm, female versus male. The few accounts that do mention the Huldra describe him in ways that emphasize his marginality even within the forest realm. He is not sovereign as she is, not the ruler and embodiment of the woodland. Instead, he is depicted as subordinate, her husband or companion, but clearly secondary in power and importance. Some stories suggest he tends the cattle while she deals with human intruders, a reversal of expected gender roles that marks him as strange, even among strange beings. Others hint that he exists primarily to explain how the Huldra reproduces, how there can be multiple forest spirits if they are not simply immortal singularities, but members of a breeding population. Where descriptions of his appearance exist, they emphasize bestiality over beauty. Unlike the Huldra, who is extraordinarily beautiful from the front and only reveals her animal from behind, the Huldra is described as rough, wild, more creature than man even when viewed face to face. His hair is matted, his features coarse, his body marked by fur or scales or other non-human characteristics that the female carefully conceals. He does not seduce because seduction is not his function. He exists, to the extent he exists at all in the folklore, as explanation rather than actor, as background detail rather than central figure. Some scholars have suggested that the near absence of the Huldra call reflects the actual dangers that medieval and early modern Scandinavian women faced in forest work. Women gathered berries and herbs, tended cattle in mountain pastures, sometimes worked alongside men in timber operations. They were vulnerable to assault, to being lured away from safety by false promises or false appearances. The Huldra serves as warning figure, embodying both the danger of the forest itself and the danger of men who might use isolation as opportunity for violence. A male forest spirit would not serve this warning function, would not map onto the actual threats women faced. And so he remains undeveloped, barely present in the folklore that shaped behavior and transmitted cultural knowledge. Others argue that the imbalance reflects deeper anxieties about female sexuality and power. The Huldra is threatening precisely because she is female and powerful, because she operates outside male control, because she inverts the expected relationship where men pursue and women submit. She chooses her targets, initiates contact, controls the terms of engagement. This inversion is fascinating and terrifying to patriarchal cultures, worthy of endless stories and warnings. Male power, by contrast, is ordinary, expected, not particularly interesting from a folkloric perspective. A Huldra call who seduced women would merely be replicating the behavior of ordinary men, would not carry the charge of transgression that makes the Huldra narratively compelling. The question of whether the Huldra and Huldra call form communities or families remains unanswered in the folklore. Are there villages of forest spirits, hidden settlements where these beings live together in social structures that mirror human ones? Or are they solitary, each Huldra claiming a territory and defending it against others of her kind? The few accounts that mention multiple forest spirits suggest territorial behavior, conflicts over boundaries and resources. But these are fragmentary and contradictory. The Huldra call's role in such social structures, if they exist, is never clarified. Some narratives hint at reproduction, at offspring born from unions between Huldra and Huldra call, or between Huldra and human men. These children are described as inheriting their mother's connection to the forest, her powers, and her dual u, though often in diminished form. They can pass in human society with effort, disguising or concealing their otherness, but they never fully belong. The Huldra call's contribution to these offspring, genetic or otherwise, is not discussed. He remains peripheral even in accounts of forest spirit reproduction, barely mentioned, easily forgotten. There are regional variations in how the male forest spirit is understood. In some areas of northern Sweden, accounts mention male trolls or spirits who serve similar functions to the Huldra, but are understood as separate species rather than masculine versions of the same being. These male spirits are often portrayed as hostile, as dangers to be avoided rather than complex figures who might reward respect or punish transgression. They lack the moral dimension that characterizes the Huldra, the sense that she operates according to rules that can be learned and followed. The male spirits are simply threats, obstacles, problems to be overcome or avoided. The rarity of the Huldra call in folklore creates interpretive challenges for modern scholars trying to understand the complete cosmology of Scandinavian forest spirits. Is his absence meaningful, indicating that these beings were understood as primarily or exclusively female? Or is it accidental, a gap in the historical record that would be filled if more accounts had survived or if collectors had asked different questions. The silence itself becomes text, something to be read and interpreted, and different readers find different meanings in the gaps. What we can say with certainty is that the Huldra call occupies marginal space in a mythology dominated by his female counterpart. Whether this reflects the actual beliefs of medieval Scandinavians or merely the biases of those who collected and recorded the folklore centuries later, remains open question. Perhaps there were rich traditions of male forest spirits that were never written down, dismissed as unimportant by collectors who focused on the more dramatic and narratively compelling figure of the seductive female. Perhaps the Huldra call was always secondary, always subordinate, a footnote in a story that was never really about him. The modern imagination, confronted with this imbalance, often tries to correct it, to create male forest spirits who are as complex and compelling as the Huldra herself. Fantasy literature and games populate Scandinavian forests with masculine counterparts who possess equivalent power and agency, who serve as guardians and punishers and seducers in equal measure. These inventions fill a gap that many contemporary readers perceive in the traditional folklore. But they are inventions nonetheless, projections of modern sensibilities onto mythologies that operated according to different logic, different priorities, different anxieties. The Huldra call remains, in the end, more absence than presence, more question than answer. He exists at the margins of a rich mythological tradition, barely visible, rarely discussed, his and function unclear. Perhaps that marginality is itself meaningful, the indication that the forests of Scandinavia were understood as fundamentally feminine spaces, ruled by feminine power, dangerous specifically because they inverted the gender hierarchies that governed the human world beyond their boundaries. The Huldra call could not be central to this mythology because centrality belonged to his counterpart, to the beautiful woman with the hidden tail, to the forest spirit whose image has endured for centuries while his has faded into near invisibility. The forests that once covered Scandinavia in unbroken expanses have retreated, carved into fragments by highways and cities, reduced to managed parks and timber plantations where every tree is numbered and its harvest date predetermined. The wolves are gone from most of their historic range, the bears confined to shrinking territories. The wilderness that once defined these northern lands transformed into something tamer, safer, fundamentally diminished. Yet the Huldra persists, not in the depleted forests, but in the collective imagination, in art and literature and music that keeps her image alive even as the world that spawned her disappears beneath concrete and cultivation. She appears in the lyrics of folk metal bands, those groups that blend traditional Scandinavian instruments with the aggression of heavy metal, creating soundscapes that honor the past while embracing contemporary forms. Bands like Fintroll and Korpiklani sing of forest spirits in languages that mix Swedish and Finnish with invented tongues. Their music a wall of sound that attempts to capture what the old forests felt like, the overwhelming presence of something vast and inhuman surrounding you. The Huldra features in these songs as she always has, beautiful and dangerous, seductive and punishing, the embodiment of wild places that refuse domestication even in memory. The music videos for these bands often feature women in traditional dress moving through modern forests, their long hair flowing, their movements suggesting something not quite human. They are attempting to visualize what folklore describes, to give contemporary audiences a glimpse of what medieval woodsmen claimed to encounter in the depths. The imagery is powerful, drawing millions of views from audiences who have never seen true wilderness, who know forests only as weekend hiking destinations with marked trails and visitor centers. Yet, something in these depictions resonates, touches a chord that suggests the Huldra speaks to needs and fears that transcend her specific cultural context. Contemporary Scandinavian literature has embraced her as well, particularly in the fantasy and horror genres that have flourished in recent decades. Authors like John Ajvide Lindqvist, who brought Swedish horror to international attention with novels that blend folklore and modern anxiety, reference the Huldra and her kin as presences that survive beneath the surface of contemporary life. In these stories, she is no longer confined to remote forests, but can appear in suburban parks, in the green spaces between housing developments, anywhere that even a fragment of the wild persists. The modernization of her mythology suggests that what she represents, the untamed and the other, cannot be fully eliminated through development and progress. Nordic noir, that distinctly Scandinavian contribution to crime fiction, occasionally incorporates folklore elements, including references to forest spirits. These mentions are usually oblique, characters dismissing old stories even as the narrative suggests that dismissal may be premature. The Huldra becomes metaphor in these contexts, representing the past that refuses to stay buried, the traditional beliefs that persist despite modernization, the sense that beneath the surface of prosperous, rational Scandinavia, something older and stranger still moves. The gaming industry, particularly in Scandinavia, where game development has become a major economic sector, has discovered the Huldra as rich source material. She appears in numerous video games, from small independent titles that treat Nordic folklore with scholarly attention to major releases that use her image more loosely. Games allow players to encounter her in ways that traditional storytelling cannot, to make choices in response to her appearance, to experience something approximating the original folkloric encounter where your decision determines your fate. The interactive of gaming makes it perhaps the closest modern equivalent to the oral storytelling traditions that kept her legend alive for centuries. One particular game deserves mention, a title called simply Huldra, developed by a small Swedish studio. It places players in the role of a modern hiker who becomes lost in northern forests and must navigate encounters with various folkloric beings, with the Huldra as central figure. The game requires players to learn the old rules, the protocols of respect and silence, the ways of acknowledging otherness without attempting to destroy or control it. Reviews praised its atmosphere and its refusal to explain everything, its willingness to leave mysteries unresolved, its recognition that the Huldra works best when she remains partially unknowable. Visual artists throughout Scandinavia continue to depict her, their interpretations ranging from traditional to radically contemporary. Some painters render her as she appears in the old accounts, beautiful woman with concealed tail, standing at forest edges in poses that evoke both invitation and warning. Others deconstruct the imagery, presenting her as abstract figure, all flowing lines and suggested forms. The idea of her rather than literal representation. Sculptors have created installations in remaining forest areas, pieces that interact with the natural environment, that can only be fully experienced by walking through the woods and encountering them unexpectedly, mirroring how the original encounters were supposed to occur. Environmental artists have claimed her as symbol of what industrial civilization destroys, making her image central to projects that address deforestation and habitat loss. Installations that combine video projection and natural settings show her image appearing among trees at dusk, fading as lights representing development encroach on the forest space. These works are explicitly activist, using the Huldra to embody what is lost when wilderness disappears, making the abstract concept of environmental destruction personal and mythological. She becomes argument for preservation, her beauty representing what future generations will never experience if current trajectories continue. Academic interest in the Huldra has intensified in recent decades, with folklorists and anthropologists publishing detailed studies of how her legend functioned in traditional societies and what it might mean for contemporary ones. These scholars note that she represents one of the most fully documented folklore figures in Scandinavian tradition, with thousands of recorded accounts allowing detailed analysis of regional variations and historical changes. Gender studies scholars have found her particularly interesting, examining how her figure reflects and challenges patriarchal assumptions, how she embodies both male fears of female sexuality and female desires for autonomy and power. Tourist industries in Norway and Sweden have not ignored her commercial potential. Forest trails are named after her, hotels use her image in their branding, guided tours promise encounters with the landscape where she supposedly dwells. This commercialization troubles some who feel it trivializes beliefs that once held genuine cultural significance, reducing the Huldra to cute mascot or marketing gimmick. Others argue that any attention, even commercial, keeps the legends alive, introduces new generations to stories they might never encounter otherwise, maintains cultural continuity even in altered form. Social media has given the Huldra new platforms for propagation. Artists share their interpretations on Instagram, writers post flash fiction about modern encounters, photographers capture forests in ways meant to evoke her presence. Hashtags dedicated to Nordic folklore accumulate thousands of posts, creating digital communities around these traditional beliefs. The Huldra appears in memes, in cosplay at conventions, in amateur videos filmed in local woods. She has been democratized, her image no longer controlled by academic authorities or cultural gatekeepers, but available for anyone to interpret and share. Yet something essential may be lost in this proliferation. The Huldra of folklore was genuinely frightening, a being who could kill, who demanded real respect and real consequences for failure to provide it. The modern Huldra is often softened, made safer, her danger aestheticized rather than visceral. She becomes beautiful image rather than embodied threat, something to be admired in artwork rather than feared in actual forests. The transformation reflects broader cultural changes. The shift from societies that lived in genuine proximity to wilderness and its dangers to societies that experience primarily through mediated forms, through screens and controlled environments where real risk has been eliminated. Some observers argue that the Huldra's survival in modern culture, even in diminished form, serves valuable function. She reminds urban Scandinavians of their connection to landscapes most will never truly know, maintains thread of continuity with ancestors who lived very different lives, provides vocabulary for discussing relationship between human and natural worlds. She is bridge between past and present, between the rational modern mindset and older ways of understanding that recognized mystery and otherness as fundamental features of reality rather than problems to be solved through and development. The question of what the Huldra means to someone who encounters her image in a video game or a folk metal song, who has never walked through true wilderness or felt the genuine fear of being lost in spaces where human presence is anomaly rather than norm, remains open. Perhaps the meaning shifts, becomes metaphorical rather than literal, psychological rather than supernatural. She might represent the wild within rather than the wild without, the untamed aspects of human that civilization tries to control but can never fully eliminate. Or she might simply become aesthetic choice, image divorced from original context, beautiful woman with cowtail as distinctive visual element in the crowded marketplace of contemporary fantasy imagery. What seems certain is that she will continue to appear, that artists and writers and musicians will keep returning to her figure, finding in it something that resonates across the centuries. Whether that continued attention represents genuine cultural continuity or merely nostalgia for a past that never quite existed as imagined. Whether it serves to keep important traditions alive or reduces them to consumable content depends on perspective and perhaps on how individual creators approach the material. The Huldra persists in modern Scandinavia, but she persists as echo, reflection, memory of something that may no longer exist in the world, but refuses to disappear from the collective imagination that world has shaped, and that shapes it in return. Step back from the accumulated details, the cow's tail and the hollow back, the seduction and the violence, the gifts and the curses, and see the Huldra for what she truly represents. She is not merely a forest spirit, not simply one more creature in the crowded bestiary of European folklore, but something far more fundamental. She is itself given form and face and will, the personification of wilderness in all its beauty and terror, its generosity and its cruelty, its absolute refusal to conform to human desires or acknowledge human sovereignty. Everything about her mythology, from her irresistible beauty to her hidden deformity to the rules governing interaction with her, serves this deeper symbolic function. The front-facing perfection that draws men into her presence mirrors how it appears to those who approach it superficially. The forest is beautiful, undeniably so, with its cathedral of trees and play of light through leaves and the almost supernatural quiet that descends when you move beyond the sound of human activity. It promises resources, timber and game and medicinal plants, promises escape from the constraints and demands of civilized life, promises authenticity and connection to something more real than the artificial constructions of human society. This is the face that shows, and like the Huldra's beauty, it is genuine, not illusion or deception, but it is incomplete, dangerously so. The hidden otherness, the tail, and the hollow back revealed only when you shift perspective or grow careless, represents what truly is beneath the beautiful surface. It is not human, does not operate according to human values, does not care about human survival or human flourishing, except insofar as humans prove themselves worthy of care through proper behavior. The forest that appears so welcoming can kill you through exposure or predation or simple disorientation, can claim you as thoroughly as the Swedish Huldra claims men who follow her into bogs. The revelation of the tale is the moment when you understand that what you thought was safe is actually dangerous, that beauty and deadliness coexist in the same entity, that your desire does not make something desirable in return. The rules governing interaction with the Huldra, the protocols of silence and acceptance and respect, map directly onto how successful cultures have always approached their relationship with natural environments. You enter as guest, not master, acknowledging that this space existed before you and will persist after you are gone. You take only what you need and show gratitude for what is given, recognizing that abundance is gift rather than entitlement. You keep certain secrets, do not boast or exploit or treat sacred things as mere resources to be monetized. Violate these protocols and face consequences. Natural or supernatural depending on your cosmology, but consequences nonetheless. Honor them and receive protection, guidance, prosperity within sustainable limits. The Huldra's capacity for violence against those who show disrespect or greed represents his power to destroy humans who overreach or exploit without wisdom. The woodsman crushed by falling timber, the hunter lost in familiar forest, the farmer whose herd sickens inexplicably. These are all manifestations of what happens when the natural world pushes back against human presumption. Pre-modern peoples understood this viscerally, knew that was not passive backdrop to human drama, but active force that could and would assert its primacy. The Huldra gave that knowledge narrative form, made it personal and immediate rather than abstract principle. But the transformation narrative, the path through the church that strips away her tail and hollow back and makes her fully human, reveals the deeper agenda of medieval Christianity and the culture it shaped. Like the Huldra, could not be permitted to remain wild, autonomous, dangerous. It had to be tamed, domesticated, brought under control, and made safe for human exploitation. The marriage in the church becomes metaphor for this larger project of domination, the process by which wilderness is transformed into managed landscape, by which forests become timber plantations, by which the chaotic abundance of wild ecosystems is reduced to the ordered productivity of agriculture. The Huldra loses her tail at the altar and loses its sovereignty under the axes of loggers and the plows of farmers operating under the assumption that God granted humanity dominion over all creation. What was once respected as having its own purposes and rights becomes redefined as resource, as property, as raw material waiting to be shaped by human will. The transformation is presented as redemption, as saving both the Huldra and the land she represents from their fallen state, as bringing them into proper relationship with divine order. But the folklore itself, even as it records this narrative of Christian triumph, cannot quite suppress the sense of profound loss, the recognition that something essential dies in the transformation. The domesticated Huldra, stripped of tail and hollow back, living as ordinary farmer's wife, mirrors what happened to the actual forests of Scandinavia over the centuries following Christianization. They were tamed, cleared, reduced to fragments managed for human benefit rather than existing on their own terms. The vast wilderness that once covered the peninsula, that required genuine respect because it could genuinely destroy you, has been replaced by something safer, more accessible, fundamentally diminished. You can hike these modern forests with GPS devices and marked trails, can call for rescue if you become lost, can treat the experience as recreation rather than genuine encounter with otherness. The tail has been removed, and what remains, while perhaps prettier and certainly more convenient, is no longer quite real. Yet the Huldra refuses to disappear entirely, persists in folklore and art and music, despite centuries of cultural transformation that should have rendered her obsolete. This persistence suggests that what she represents cannot be fully eliminated, that the wild survives even when wilderness does not, that human attempts to domesticate completely always fail at some level. The forests may be managed, but they still harbor mysteries. The landscapes may be mapped, but they still hold spaces where human control falters. And deep in the human psyche, beneath layers of civilization and technology, something still responds to the image of the beautiful woman at the forest edge, still recognizes the mixture of desire and danger she embodies. Modern environmental movements have discovered in the Huldra a powerful symbol for what industrial civilization destroys and what must be protected if anything resembling wilderness is to survive for future generations. She represents not merely preservation of specific forests or species, but preservation of the principle that has value beyond human utility. That some things should remain wild, not because we lack the power to tame them, but because their wildness itself is precious. The tail and the hollow back, the markers of her otherness that medieval Christianity sought to eliminate, become in contemporary interpretation the very features worth celebrating and defending. The irony is sharp. The transformation narrative intended to demonstrate Christianity's power over pagan spirits becomes, in retrospect, documentation of ecological catastrophe, evidence of the moment when Scandinavian culture shifted from sustainable coexistence with wilderness to exploitative domination that could only end in depletion. The happy ending where the Huldra loses her tail and becomes human wife is revealed as tragedy. The loss of guardian and sovereignty. The silencing of voice that spoke for spaces beyond human control. What was presented as redemption looks increasingly like destruction. The killing of something beautiful and essential in exchange for short-term convenience and profit. The Huldra mythology, then, serves as cautionary tale for the present moment, when humanity faces consequences of treating as resource rather than relation, as property rather than partner. We have married the wild, stripped away its dangerous otherness, made it safe and manageable. And in doing so, we have lost something we did not fully understand we needed until its absence became critical. The forests are diminished. The climate is destabilizing. The complex ecosystems that sustained life for millennia are collapsing under the weight of human demands. We removed the tail and filled the hollow back. And now we discover that what we thought were deformities were actually essential features, connections to realities we dismissed as primitive superstition. Perhaps the Huldra's greatest gift to contemporary culture is the question she poses simply by existing in the folklore. What would it mean to approach as we were supposed to approach her? With genuine respect, with acknowledgement of our guest status, with willingness to accept otherness without demanding it conform to our categories. What would it mean to keep the protocols? To take only what we need, to leave offerings in gratitude rather than simply extracting without acknowledgement? What would it mean to let some things remain wild, unexplained, beyond our control, recognizing that our inability to domesticate them might be feature rather than failure? These are not merely abstract philosophical questions, but urgent practical ones as ecosystems collapse and climate patterns shift toward catastrophe. The Huldra stands at the forest edge still, beautiful and terrible, her tail hidden beneath her skirt, her hollow back concealed, waiting to see whether this generation of humans will finally learn the lessons encoded in her mythology. Will we honor the protocols, acknowledge the otherness, accept that some things should not be domesticated? Or will we continue the project of transformation, stripping away wildness wherever we encounter it, until nothing remains but managed landscapes and museum exhibitions displaying what we destroyed? The choice, as it always has been, determines whether we walk out of the forest or whether the forest claims us. The Huldra watches, patient as stone, ancient as trees, inhuman in all the ways that matter. She has seen centuries of humans make this choice, has watched the consequences unfold, knows how the story ends if we choose wrongly. The tail still swishes beneath her skirt. The hollow back still opens behind her. She has not been fully domesticated, not completely transformed, not yet. But time runs short, and the forest grows smaller every year. And soon there may be nowhere left for her to stand, no wilderness remaining to embody. And when she finally disappears, not into marriage and transformation, but into simple extinction, humanity will discover too late what was lost when we killed the wild to make it safe.